December 2nd, 1805. Dawn breaks over Moravia, and Napoleon is doing something that looks insane. He's left his right flank dangerously thin, a skeleton force stretched along a frozen stream, facing the combined might of two empires. His generals are nervous. If the Allies hit that weak point hard, the whole French army could be rolled up and destroyed. But Napoleon isn't worried. He's counting on them to attack there. What the Allied commanders don't realize is that they're not exploiting a weakness. They're walking into the most elaborate trap in military history, and by the time they figure it out, an entire wing of their army will be cut off, surrounded, and annihilated. This is how 20,000 men became bait for a massacre. To understand what's about to happen, you need to understand the impossible situation Napoleon faced in the weeks before this battle. It's late November 1805. Napoleon has pushed deep into Austria, capturing Vienna itself. Sounds like victory, right? It wasn't. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Because now he's stranded, hundreds of miles from France. His supply lines stretched impossibly thin. And marching toward him, two emperors, Tsar Alexander IV of Russia and Emperor Francis I of Austria, combined, united, hungry for revenge. The numbers are terrifying. Napoleon has roughly 73,000 men. The Allies? Nearly 90,000. And those aren't tired, scattered troops. That's a concentrated force of Russian and Austrian soldiers, fresh, confident, and convinced they're about to crush the French upstart once and for all. But here's what makes it worse. Napoleon can't retreat. If he pulls back, the Prussians, who are watching from the sidelines, waiting to see who wins, will almost certainly join the coalition against him. That would mean another 200,000 enemy soldiers. Game over. France surrounded. Everything he's built, destroyed. He can't wait for reinforcements either. Every day he delays, his army gets weaker. Disease, desertion, dwindling, supplies. Meanwhile, more Allied troops are marching to join the coalition. So retreat means death. Waiting means death. The only option? Attack. But how do you attack a force that outnumbers you by 17,000 men, holds the high ground, and knows you're desperate? You don't attack them. You make them attack you. And not just anywhere. You make them attack exactly where you want them to. You make them think they're winning while they're actually losing. You turn their entire battle plan into a weapon that destroys them. That's not strategy. That's sorcery, and Napoleon is about to pull it off. Now here's where the genius begins. And I need you to pay attention, because what Napoleon does next is so counterintuitive, so seemingly stupid, that his own generals thought he'd lost his mind. There's a terrain feature on this battlefield that matters more than anything else. The Pratzen Heights. It's a long, elevated plateau that dominates the entire area. If you control those heights, you control everything. You can see every movement. You can strike anywhere. It's the most valuable piece of ground for miles. And Napoleon has it. His troops are positioned on the Pratzen Heights. The high ground, the dominant position. Military textbooks for centuries have said the same thing. Never give up the high ground. Never. It's the first rule of battlefield positioning. Napoleon gives it up. On December 1st, the day before the battle, he orders his forces to abandon the Pratzen Heights. Just walk away. Leave the most valuable terrain on the entire battlefield completely undefended. His marshals are stunned. This isn't bold. This isn't innovative. This is suicide. The Allies will take those heights immediately, and then the French will be fighting uphill against an entrenched enemy with superior numbers. But Napoleon sees something they don't. He's not thinking about terrain. He's thinking about psychology. He's not fighting the ground. He's fighting the men who will make decisions about how to use that ground, and he knows exactly how they think. See, the Allied army has a problem. Two emperors, technically in charge, but neither one is really commanding. The actual battle plan is being drawn up by an Austrian general named Franz von Weyrother. Weyrother is smart, experienced, meticulous. He's spent days studying maps, analyzing positions, calculating movements. He's created an elaborate plan with multiple columns, precise timing, coordinated attacks. There's just one issue. He's never fought Napoleon. Weyrother looks at the battlefield like a chess problem. Move this piece here, that piece there, overwhelming force at the critical point. Logical, mathematical, clean. But Napoleon doesn't play chess. Napoleon plays poker, and he's been watching the Allies watch him. He knows what they see when they look at his army. They see a desperate force, outnumbered, far from home, with a dangerously weak right flank. They see an opportunity, a chance to sweep around that thin right side, cut the French off from Vienna, and destroy them completely. It's such an obvious opportunity that Weyrother would be a fool not to take it. And that's exactly what Napoleon is counting on. Here's the thing about traps. The best ones don't look like traps. They look like opportunities. They look like gifts. The victim doesn't walk in despite the danger. They walk in because of what they think they're gaining. Napoleon isn't just leaving his right flank weak. He's advertising it. He sends cavalry patrols that accidentally reveal the thin defenses. He allows Allied scouts to observe his positions without interference. He even requests a meeting with Tsar Alexander to discuss peace terms, a meeting he knows will be rejected. But that makes him look desperate, afraid, eager to avoid battle. Every single move is calculated to send the same message. The French are vulnerable. Their right flank is the weak point. Attack there and victory is certain. Fight so, Allies receive this message loud and clear. On the night of December 1st, Weyrother presents his plan to the Allied commanders. It's exactly what Napoleon predicted. The main attack will hit the French right flank with overwhelming force. Columns of Russian and Austrian troops, nearly 40,000 men, will smash through that thin line along the Goldbach stream, sweep behind the French army, and cut off their retreat. It's a brilliant plan. Against anyone else, it would work. But Weyrother has made a fatal error. He's created his plan based on what he sees. And what he sees is exactly what Napoleon wants him to see. The French right flank isn't weak because Napoleon made a mistake. It's weak because Napoleon needs it to be weak. It's the bait. Now let's talk about the men who are about to become that bait. Because this isn't just about lines on a map. This is about soldiers who know they're going to be hit by a sledgehammer and told to hold anyway. General Claude Legrand commands the forward position along the Goldbach stream. His division is responsible for holding the villages of Telnitz and Sokolnitz, tiny farming settlements that are about to become some of the bloodiest ground in European history. Legrand has maybe 10,000 men, stretched across miles of front, facing 4 times their number. His soldiers know what's coming. They've seen the enemy campfires on the hills. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, the Allied army glittering in the darkness like a constellation of death. And they know something else too. They know they're not supposed to win. Their orders are simple and brutal. Hold. No matter what. No matter how many Russians pour into those villages. No matter how many friends fall beside them. Hold the line. Buy time. Time for what? They don't know. Napoleon hasn't told them. He's told almost no one the full plan. But he's promised them that if they just hold long enough, victory will come. That's what they're clinging to as the first gray light of December 2nd creeps over the frozen fields. A promise from a general who's never lied to them. A belief that the agony they're about to endure means something. God, it better mean something. Because at 7 a.m., the first Allied columns begin to move, and they're heading straight for that thin, desperate line along the Goldbach stream. The trap is set. Now it just needs to survive long enough to close. The morning of December 2nd, 1805, begins with an almost supernatural silence. A thick fog has rolled in overnight, blanketing the valleys in gray mist. Visibility drops to nearly nothing. Soldiers on both sides can hear movement, the crunch of boots on frozen ground, the jingle of harnesses, the muffled commands of officers. But they can't see what's coming. For Napoleon, this fog is a gift from the gods, because right now, at this exact moment, his entire plan is hanging by a thread. The bait is in position. Legrand's thin line is stretched along the Goldbach. The Bieke trap is ready to spring. But the man who's supposed to make it all work? He's not here yet. Marshal Louis-Nicolas Davout and his Third Corps are still miles away, force marching through the darkness, racing against time itself. Without Davout, the right flank won't bend. It will break, and if it breaks too early, before Napoleon can strike the killing blow, the whole plan collapses. Everything depends on Davout arriving in time. Let's talk about what Davout is doing, because this march might be the most insane physical feat of the entire Napoleonic Wars. Third Corps was in Vienna, over 110 kilometers away. When Napoleon summoned them, Davout didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He simply turned to his exhausted men and told them to march. They'd been marching for weeks already. Months, really. The Grande Armée had crossed Europe on foot, fighting battles along the way. These soldiers were tired beyond tired. Boots falling apart, uniforms in tatters, bodies running on. Nothing but willpower and whatever scraps of food they could find. And now they had to cover 110 kilometers in roughly 48 hours. No sleep, no rest. Through freezing December nights and muddy roads churned to soup by thousands of feet before them. Men collapsed from exhaustion and were left behind. Others literally died mid-stride, their hearts giving out from the strain. But they kept moving, because Davout told them to, and because somewhere ahead, their brothers were about to face an enemy 4 times their size. This is what the French army was. Not just tactics, not just Napoleon's genius. It was this: ordinary men doing impossible things because they believed, truly believed, that together they were unstoppable. Davout's corps covered those 110 kilometers in 48 hours. Military historians still shake their heads at this. It shouldn't have been possible. By any reasonable calculation, those men should have arrived too late, if they arrived at all. But at dawn, on December 2nd, the fog swirls across the battlefield, and the first Allied columns begin their advance. The lead elements of 3 Corps come stumbling out of the mist. They're exhausted. They're half dead on their feet. Some of them can barely hold their muskets. And they're just in time. 7 a.m., the Allied attack begins. 4 massive columns, nearly 40,000 men under Generals Dokhturov, Langeron, Przybyszewski, and Kolorat, start descending from the Pratzen Heights toward the French right flank. This is Weyerother's grand plan in motion. Overwhelming force, coordinated assault. Sweep around the weak French right, cut them off, destroy them. Simple, elegant, unstoppable. From the Allied perspective, everything looks perfect. The French positions along the Goldbach are pitiful. A few thousand men scattered through villages and marshland. The Austrian and Russian commanders can barely believe their luck. This isn't going to be a battle. It's going to be a massacre. At Telnitz, the first clash erupts. Russian infantry pour into the village from multiple directions. The French defenders, outnumbered 5-1, fight from houses, from behind walls, from ditches filled with icy water. Musket fire crackles through the fog. Men scream. Bayonets flash. The French line bends. At Sokolnitz, it's even worse. Wave after wave of Allied soldiers crash against the thin French position. The village changes hands once, twice, 3 times. Every street becomes a killing ground. Bodies pile up in doorways. Legrand's men are dying in numbers that should mean collapse, dying in ways that should shatter morale and send survivors running. But they don't run. They hold. Why? Why do men stand and die when every instinct screams at them to flee? Part of it is training. Part of it is discipline. Part of it is the simple fact that in the chaos of battle, running can be just as deadly as fighting. But there's something else, too. These soldiers believe in Napoleon, not as a distant commander, not as an abstract idea, but as the man who's led them to victory after impossible victory. The man who shares their hardships, who knows their names, who's promised them that their suffering has meaning. And right now, somewhere in the fog behind them, Napoleon is watching, waiting, trusting them to buy him the time he needs. They won't let him down. So they hold, minute by agonizing minute, taking casualties that would break any normal unit, watching friends fall and closing ranks over their bodies, retreating when they must, counterattacking when they can, but never, never giving up the line completely. And then Davout's men arrive. Picture this moment. You're a French soldier at Austerlitz. You've been fighting for what feels like hours. Half your company is dead or wounded. Your ammunition is running low. The enemy just keeps coming, endless waves of them, and you're so tired you can barely lift your musket. And then, through the fog, you hear it. Drums. French drums. And voices. French voices. Singing, of all things. Singing as they march. Davout's corps comes out of the mist like ghosts, like salvation. Thousands of men who've marched through hell to stand beside you. They're exhausted. You can see it in their faces. But they're here. They're forming up. They're adding their muskets to the line. The Russians notice the change immediately. The French position that was about to crumble suddenly stiffens. Counterattacks materialize out of nowhere. The easy victory Weyrother promised starts to feel less easy. But the Allied commanders don't stop. They can't stop. The plan is in motion. More columns are committed. More men pour down from the heights toward that stubborn French right flank. This is exactly what Napoleon wanted. Every soldier the Allies send south is a soldier who isn't on the Pratzen Heights. Every minute they spend trying to break through Davout and Legrand is a minute the heights stand empty. The bait is working. But the men who are the bait, they're paying for it in blood. By 8:30 a.m., the fighting along the Goldbach has reached a level of brutality that defies description. Telnitz has been reduced to rubble. Sokolnitz is burning. The stream itself runs red, choked with bodies and debris. French and Russian soldiers fight hand to hand in frozen ditches, too close for muskets, stabbing with bayonets and clubbing with musket butts. The French line bends further. It bows. It warps into shapes that shouldn't be able to hold. But it doesn't break. Davout is everywhere, riding through the chaos, rallying broken units, personally leading counterattacks. His officers think he's lost his mind. Corps commanders aren't supposed to expose themselves like this. But Davout understands what's at stake. If this line breaks, everything breaks. Napoleon's plan, the battle, maybe France itself. So he fights like a common soldier, and his men, seeing their marshal in the thick of it, find strength they didn't know they had. Hold. Just hold. The message passes from man to man, unit to unit. We don't know why, but we have to hold. And somewhere behind them, on a small hill overlooking the battlefield, Napoleon watches the slaughter through his telescope. He sees his men dying. He sees the line bending. He sees how close everything is to disaster. And he smiles. Because Napoleon isn't watching the Goldbach. He's watching the Pratzen Heights. And what he sees there is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. The Allied columns are still marching south, thousands upon thousands of soldiers streaming off the heights to join the attack on the French right. The plateau that dominates the battlefield, the high ground that any sane commander would defend to the death, is emptying. Weyrother's plan is working perfectly. Too perfectly. The Allies are so focused on their grand envelopment, so certain they're about to crush the weak French flank, that they've forgotten the most basic rule of warfare. Never leave your center exposed. By 8:45 a.m., the Pratzen Heights are held by a skeleton force. a thin screen of Austrian and Russian troops, most of them already marching south to join the decisive attack. Napoleon turns to Marshal Soult, commander of V Corps, the best corps in the Grande Armée, 20,000 veterans who've been hidden in the fog, waiting for this exact moment. "How long will it take you to reach the heights?" Napoleon asks. Soult considers. 20 minutes, sire." Napoleon checks his watch. He looks at the heights one more time. The fog is beginning to lift. Sunlight breaks through the clouds, what will later be called the Sun of Austerlitz. "Then let us wait another 15 minutes, Napoleon says, "and then it will be time." The trap is about to close, and 40,000 Allied soldiers have no idea they're already dead. 9:04 a.m. The fog lifts, the sun breaks through, and Napoleon gives the order that will end the war. One sharp blow, and it's over. That's what he tells Soult. One sharp blow, as if they're not about to execute one of the most audacious maneuvers in military history, as if 20,000 men storming an elevated plateau against enemy fire is just routine. But for the Grande Armée, maybe it is. Soult's Ivy Corps rises from concealment like a tide. 2 divisions, Saint-Hilaire on the right, Vendôme on the left, surge forward across the open ground toward the Pratzen Heights. Drums beating, eagles gleaming in the sudden sunlight. 20,000 men moving as one. The Allied commanders on the heights can't believe what they're seeing. Where did they come from? There were supposed to be no significant French forces in the center. Weyrother's plan accounted for everything. The French were weak on the right. That's where the battle was being won. The center was empty. It had to be empty. It wasn't empty. It was the hammer. The French assault on the Pratzen Heights is one of those moments that separates ordinary soldiers from legends. The slopes are steep. The ground is slick with frost. Enemy artillery opens up immediately, cannonballs tearing through the advancing columns. Men fall by the dozens, by the hundreds. But the columns don't stop, don't slow, don't waver. They march straight into the guns. General Saint-Hilaire leads from the front, sword drawn, screaming encouragement over the thunder of artillery. His men follow without hesitation. These are veterans of a dozen battles. They've marched across Europe. They've beaten Austrians, Prussians, and Russians before. They will not be stopped by a hill. The first French units reach the plateau's edge at roughly 9:15 a.m. What follows is 15 minutes of some of the most savage close-quarters fighting of the entire Napoleonic era. The Allied defenders aren't cowards. They're professional soldiers who understand exactly what's at stake. If the French take these heights, the entire Allied army is split in two. The whole battle plan collapses, everything collapses, so they fight. With bayonets and musket butts and bare hands, men grapple in the mud, rolling down slopes, stabbing and choking and clawing. But the French have momentum. The French have surprise. And the French have something else, the knowledge that Napoleon is watching, that he's trusted them with the decisive blow, that everything depends on them. By 9:30 a.m., the first French eagles plant themselves on the Pratzen Heights. The center of the Allied line has been pierced. Now imagine you're a Russian soldier in one of those columns attacking the French right. You've been fighting for over 2 hours. The advance has been brutal, far more resistance than expected. But you're making progress. The French line is bending. A little more pressure and it'll break completely. Victory is close. You can feel it. And then a messenger arrives. Pale-faced. Panicked. The French have taken the Pratzen Heights. At first you don't understand. That's impossible. The heights were secure. That's where the reserve was. Positioned. That's where command headquarters is located. Then you turn around and look. And you see French flags flying where Austrian flags flew an hour ago. You see enemy cannon being wheeled into position. Cannon that can now fire down into your rear. You see the escape route to the north closing like a door. And in that moment, you realize the truth. You haven't been winning. You've been herded. Drawn south, away from safety, away from support, while the enemy slipped behind you and cut off your retreat. You're not attacking anymore. You're trapped. The Pratzen Heights don't just dominate the battlefield visually, they dominate it strategically. From those heights, Napoleon can now do something devastating. He can split the Allied army in half. The northern wing, under the nominal command of Prince Bagration, is separated from the southern columns that have been attacking the French right. There's no way to reinforce, no way to coordinate. The Allied army is now fighting two separate battles, and they're losing both. But the real catastrophe is in the south. Those 40,000 men who marched off the heights to crush Napoleon's weak right flank? They're now behind enemy lines. The French hold the high ground above them. The French hold the roads behind them. The French are between them and safety. And they're still engaged with Davout and Legrand along the Goldbach. The anvil in front of them. The hammer above them. And nowhere to run. This is the moment the battle transforms from a fight into a slaughter. Napoleon wastes no time. From his new position on the Pratzen Heights, he can see the entire southern half of the battlefield laid out before him like a map. He can see the Allied columns struggling along the Goldbach. He can see their confusion as messengers arrive with news of the heights falling. He can see the first units beginning to break off and retreat. But retreat to where? Napoleon sends orders flying. Davout's corps, which has been holding the line for hours, now goes on the offensive. The anvil becomes a blade. French infantry surge forward, driving the disorganized Allied columns back toward the frozen ponds and marshes that lie behind them. At the same time, French forces from the heights sweep down from above, attacking the Allied flank and rear. It's not a battle anymore. It's a vice, and it's closing. The Allied commanders try desperately to organize a retreat, but there's no coherent command structure. The Austrian and Russian generals are scattered, some cut off from their units entirely. Orders conflict. Units mill in confusion, and all the while French artillery pounds them from above. Let's pause here and acknowledge something important. What's happening to the Allied army isn't just a military defeat. It's a psychological annihilation. These soldiers woke up this morning confident of victory. Their plan was working. The French were retreating. Everything was going exactly as Weyrother predicted. And then, in less than an hour, everything inverted. The hunters became the hunted. The encirclers became the encircled. The victory became a trap. That kind of reversal doesn't just break formations, it breaks minds. Soldiers who were advancing confidently 2 hours ago are now running in blind panic. Units that held together through the morning's hard fighting dissolve into mobs. Officers lose control. Discipline evaporates. This is what Napoleon understood better than any commander of his era. War isn't just about killing the enemy. It's about breaking their will to fight. Make them believe they've already lost, and the killing becomes almost secondary. The Allied army hasn't just lost the battle. They've lost the ability to even understand what happened to them. By 11 a.m., the southern Allied wing is in full collapse. French forces press from 3 directions: north from the heights, west from the former French positions, and east from units that have swung around to complete the encirclement. The only escape route leads south, across the frozen ponds near the villages of Satchan and Menitz. Thousands of desperate soldiers stream toward these ponds, retreating, running, crawling across the ice toward what they hope is safety. Napoleon watches from the heights. He sees the dark masses of men crowding onto the frozen surfaces. He sees an opportunity. He orders his artillery to target the ice. What follows is one of the most controversial moments of the battle. French cannonballs crash into the frozen ponds. The ice, already groaning under the weight of thousands of men, horses, and artillery pieces, begins to crack. And then it gives way. The accounts vary. Some historians say dozens drowned, others say hundreds. A few contemporary sources claim thousands, though this is likely exaggerated. But the numbers almost don't matter. What matters is the image, the sound, the horror. Men plunging into freezing water, screaming, clawing at breaking ice. Horses, thrashing in panic, dragging their riders under. Artillery pieces vanishing into black water. And above it all, the steady boom of French cannon. Not aiming at soldiers anymore, aiming at the ice beneath their feet. Those who make it across the ponds find no safety. French cavalry patrols sweep the far shore, capturing or cutting down anyone who emerges. Those who try to hide are hunted through the marshes for hours afterward. The Southern Allied wing doesn't just lose, it ceases to exist as a fighting force. 20,000 men, gone, dead, drowned, captured, or scattered beyond any hope of reorganization. And the battle isn't even over yet. On the northern end of the battlefield, Prince Bagration's wing is faring slightly better, but only slightly. Bagration is a competent commander, one of the best in the Russian army. When he sees the heights fall, he immediately understands the danger. Unlike the southern commanders, he doesn't wait for orders that will never come. He begins an organized fighting retreat. His rearguard actions are textbook. Cavalry charges to buy time. Infantry forming squares to hold key positions. A slow, bloody but controlled withdrawal north. Napoleon sends forces to pursue, but Bagration's skilled defense prevents the kind of total annihilation happening in the south. By afternoon, his wing has escaped, battered, bloodied, but intact. It's the only piece of the Allied army that survives as a coherent unit. But one wing surviving doesn't change the mathematics of catastrophe. By 2:00 p.m., the Battle of Austerlitz is effectively over. The Allied army has suffered somewhere between 27,000 and 36,000 casualties. Killed, wounded, captured, drowned. The numbers are so devastating that precise counts become impossible. The French have lost perhaps 8,000 to 9,000 men. The exchange rate is almost 4-to-1. This isn't just victory. This is annihilation. The sun sets on December 2nd, 1805, and the battlefield looks like the end of the world. Bodies everywhere, carpeting the slopes of the Pratzen Heights, piled in the streets of Telnitz and Sokolnitz, floating in the dark water of shattered ponds. French, Russian, Austrian. The dead don't care about nationality anymore. And in the middle of it all, Napoleon rides across the field. He stops to speak with wounded soldiers, French and Allied alike. He orders his surgeons to treat enemy wounded with the same care as his own men. Because for Napoleon, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of the next phase. The aftermath unfolds with stunning speed. Emperor Francis of Austria requests a meeting with Napoleon the very next day, less than 24 hours after watching his army shattered. Napoleon is gracious in victory, polite, almost gentle. This is part of his genius, knowing when to crush and when to conciliate. The armistice is signed almost immediately. Austria agrees to withdraw from the coalition, to cede territory, to pay indemnities. The Third Coalition crumbles. Russia withdraws east. The Holy Roman Empire receives its death blow. Napoleon's domination of Europe is complete. But let's talk about what actually happened. Because Austerlitz wasn't just a victory, it was a masterpiece. How do you beat an enemy that outnumbers you? Napoleon's answer: you make your weakness into a weapon. He took his weakest point and made it weaker. He invited attack. He practically begged the enemy to do exactly what they wanted to do. Why? Because people see what they expect to see. Show a hungry man food, and he stops looking for traps. The Allied commanders were looking for weakness. Napoleon showed them weakness. And they never stopped to ask, why is he showing us this? The Pratzen Heights gambit is even more audacious. Napoleon gave up the most valuable terrain on the battlefield, voluntarily. He handed his enemy an enormous advantage and trusted they would misuse it. Weyrother saw a weak right flank. He saw an opportunity for envelopment. He saw a textbook victory. Napoleon saw a man who would do exactly what the map told him to do. A man who couldn't imagine the weakness was intentional. Napoleon wasn't fighting the Allied army. He was fighting Weyrother's mind. And he won before the first shot was fired. But let's not pretend this was clean. Legrand's men along the Goldbach weren't just bait in some abstract sense. They were fathers, sons, brothers, men who stood in the freezing dawn knowing they were meant to absorb the blow. Thousands died so the trap could work, so the heights could empty, so Soult could deliver the killing stroke. Napoleon knew this when he positioned them. He knew he was sending men to die not to win their own fight, but to make someone else's victory possible. That's the part of military genius that doesn't make it into triumphant paintings. The calculation, the coldness. History calls him a genius. The men who died at Telnitz might call him something else. Both would be right. Davout's March deserves its own monument, 110 kilometers in 48 hours. In December, after weeks of constant campaigning, those soldiers didn't march because it was possible. They marched because it was necessary, because Davout told them their brothers needed them. That's not logistics. That's love. Love of country, love of comrades, love of the man who led them. Men will do impossible things for a leader they believe in. The son of Austerlitz became legend immediately. That moment when the fog lifted, right as Soult's corps began its assault, felt like divine intervention. Even at the end, exiled and dying on St. Helena, Napoleon talked about Austerlitz, about the sun, about the moment when everything came together in perfect, terrible harmony. It was, he said, his greatest victory. He was right. Not because of the casualties or territory gained, but because of what it represented, the absolute peak of one man's ability to impose his will on chaos. The day he made an empire walk into a trap of its own design. So what does Austerlitz teach us? Not just military students, not just history enthusiasts. What does it teach anyone who's ever faced impossible odds? Anyone who's been outnumbered, out-resourced, counted out before the fight even began? It teaches us that the game isn't always what it appears to be. The Allied commanders at Austerlitz weren't stupid. Weyrother was experienced. The Russian and Austrian generals had fought campaigns across Europe. They had more men, better positions, every conventional advantage, and they lost, catastrophically. Why? Because they fought the battle they expected to fight. They saw Napoleon's weakness and attacked it. They followed the logical plan. They did everything right. And that's exactly why they lost. Napoleon didn't give them a battle. He gave them a story, a narrative they wanted to believe. The desperate French, overextended and vulnerable, finally exposed. The chance to end the war in one glorious stroke. It was a beautiful story. Compelling. Logical. It just wasn't true. This is the deepest lesson of Austerlitz. Your enemy's greatest weapon isn't their army. It's your own assumptions. The Allies assumed Napoleon's weakness was real. They assumed he'd made a mistake. They assumed the opportunity they saw was genuine. Napoleon weaponized those assumptions. He didn't just account for what the enemy might do. He controlled what they would do. He fed them the story they wanted to hear and let their own confidence destroy them. Think about how terrifying that is. You march onto the battlefield certain of victory. You execute your plan perfectly. Every unit moves exactly where it's supposed to. Every attack lands exactly where you aimed it. And then you realize, too late, that your perfect plan was his plan all along. Your victory was his trap. Your confidence was his weapon. That's not just defeat. That's psychological annihilation. There's a moment in every great victory when the losing side realizes what's actually happening. At Austerlitz, that moment came when French eagles appeared on the Pratzen Heights, when Allied soldiers in the south looked up and saw enemy flags where friendly flags should have been. In that instant, the entire mental framework of the battle collapsed. We're not winning. We never were. We've been manipulated from the start. That realization spread through the Allied army like poison. It broke units that hadn't even been attacked yet. It turned an organized fighting force into a panicked mob. Napoleon understood that battles are won in the mind before they're won on the field. Break the enemy's understanding of what's happening, and their physical resistance crumbles automatically. Austerlitz wasn't just a victory of tactics. It was a victory of psychology, of narrative control, of making the enemy defeat themselves. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Napoleon's genius required sacrifice, demanded it. The men at Telnitz and Sokolnitz weren't volunteers. They didn't raise their hands and say, "Yes, let us be bait." They were ordered into position and told to hold. They followed those orders because they trusted Napoleon, because they believed their suffering served a purpose. And it did. The plan worked. France won its greatest victory, but thousands of men paid for that victory with their lives, not in the moment of triumph, but in the desperate, bloody, unglamorous work of being the anvil, of standing still while the hammer was positioned. Every strategic masterpiece has this cost. Someone has to hold the line. Someone has to die so that others can win. Napoleon's genius was real, but it was built on the bodies of men who trusted him. That's not a criticism. That's just truth. The truth of war. The truth of leadership. The truth of what it costs to achieve the impossible. Austerlitz became the standard against which all other victories were measured. Military academies still teach it. Strategists still study it. 200 years later, officers debate the timing of Soult's assault, the positioning of Legrand's line, the exact moment Napoleon knew the trap would work. But beyond the tactical details, Austerlitz teaches something simpler and more profound. Don't fight the battle your enemy expects. Don't defend where they attack. Don't attack where they're strong. Don't play the game by their rules. Change the game entirely. Make them think they're winning while they're losing. Make them commit to a plan that serves your purposes. Make their strength into weakness, their confidence into blindness, their victory into defeat. That's what Napoleon did on December 2nd, 1805. He didn't just beat the Allied army. He made them beat themselves. The sun that rose over Austerlitz illuminated something new in the history of warfare. Not just a French victory, not just a coalition's defeat, but a demonstration of what's possible when genius, will, and ruthlessness combine. Napoleon would fight many more battles, win many more victories. Eventually he would lose, at Leipzig, at Waterloo, on the frozen roads of Russia. But he never surpassed Austerlitz, because Austerlitz wasn't just his greatest victory. It was the purest expression of his particular genius, the ability to see not just the battlefield, but the minds of the men who commanded on it. The ability to control not just his own forces, but his enemies' decisions. For one perfect day, Napoleon didn't just fight a war, he conducted it, like a symphony, like a master manipulating puppets. And when the sun set on December 2nd, 1805, the world had changed. 2 emperors humiliated, an empire shattered, a legend born. All because one man understood something his enemies never grasped. The most dangerous trap is the one that looks like an opportunity.